Welcome to the Dear NICU Mama podcast. Our mission is to connect the past and the present NICU mom by bringing them out of isolation and into a sisterhood of women who can stand alongside each other as we heal and grow both in and out of the NICU.
Our hope is that through interviews with trauma-informed medical and maternal mental health experts and vulnerable stories from NICU mamas themselves, that you would feel connected to the Dear NICU Mama sisterhood around the world. So, whether your NICU journey was 50 years ago,
or whether you find yourself in the NICU today, we hope that this podcast reminds you that you are not alone. Hi, beautiful mamas. It's Ashley here, the co-host of the Dear NICU Mama podcast. And this week's episode is a special replay episode all the way back from season 2. So you'll even hear us reference things like COVID isolation and how Martha and I hadn't hugged for 6 months. But we are excited to share this episode because as we talked about this season and the content for this season, this one came to the front of our minds because not only is it invaluable information about high-risk pregnancy after NICU, but it's also led and taught to us by a provider who's a NICU mom herself. So we hope you love this episode and we'll see you guys next week.
Hi, mamas. Welcome to the Dear NICU Mama podcast. It's your co-hosts, Martha and
Ashley.
And it's fun because we can actually see each other virtually. I have yet to hug her for 6 months now. So
How many months?
But, you know, I get virtual hugs from you all the time, and that's what's important. Today, as we continue our recordings from isolation, we have a special episode with Dr. Stefanie Gefroh Ellison. She is an OB and a local expert on high-risk pregnancy and also a NICU mama herself. Do you want to say hi?
Hello.
Welcome. We're so glad that you're here with us. And as you all know, sometimes on the podcast, we share NICU mama stories. And sometimes we have experts here. So having you here and being able to share from both of those perspectives is really a blessing for us and for our audience. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your journey as a NICU mom? Just give us a little brief synopsis of what that was like for you and where that fell in your life and your journey as an OB.
Sure. Well, my twins were born 4 years ago. Actually, today, I was thinking about this morning in anticipation of our podcast today, that today was discharge day for us.
Oh my gosh.
For me.
Oh, for you. Okay. Okay, gotcha.
Today was discharge day. And I was going to say, probably like all of us have experienced, it's the saddest day.
Yes,
when you leave and you leave your child or children in the hospital. We basically just went out the door and then walked right back in. So my journey, it starts with fertility issues. We started trying for our family, in my late 30s, and it just was not going as expected. And so we did end up going through in vitro fertilization, and we had several rounds which were not successful. And kind of we're at a crossroads, should we move forward or not? And I was just sharing with one of my girlfriends last week for our kid's birthday. I said something in my mind just told me I had to keep going, that, I just felt in my heart that I was going to have twins and it was going to be a boy and a girl. And sometimes we have those intuitions and they're correct and sometimes not. So, it is what it is, but that was my motivation for keeping going and convincing my husband that we should try one more time. And we did end up getting pregnant with twins. And I had a really great pregnancy. I felt really good. I was, I think I was just so grateful and excited after going through fertility issues that, here we are, and we were going to have, going to be blessed with twins. NICU really wasn't on my radar, like a lot of, maybe that was naive on my part. I just, I don't know, but as far as like how I felt, it was very different than what my body did during pregnancy, which I think a lot of NICU moms can relate to. I felt great. And it was at about 20 weeks when I started having a lot of contractions. And it was just kind of a progressive change in, my activities. And, thankfully, for the most part, I was able to still work. I had some modifications in my schedule. And I say that just because I don't know how my mind would have handled being at home, the entire pregnancy. I think I would have struggled with anxiety a lot had I not been able to spend some time outside the house. But it was pretty strict. Like I'd get home from work and have to rest. And my last OB appointment, they had checked me, and each week it was just a source of anxiety because I just knew that the check was coming. And each week it was always a little bit more dilated and a little bit more thinned out. And so that last OB appointment that I had, I kind of left with a lot of fear, but I was going to keep going, and I was not quite 34 weeks at that point in time. And I remember the OBGYN saying to me, if your water breaks, you probably want to just come right away to the hospital. And he's like, I'm just a little bit worried about your babies being breech and you're so far dilated. And he's like, were you worried about that? And I'm thinking, well, I'm a patient in this scenario. It's not my job to worry about those kind of things, but now I am. So anyway, it started that Sunday morning. And I was I had contractions a lot, so I didn't really think too much of it. I tried to go about my day. And then by later afternoon, it was pretty clear that I needed to go in. My husband wasn't home. I called him and we headed in. And by the time I got to the hospital, it was much too late to stop anything. I was dilated 5 or 6 centimeters, and with both babies being breech, they asked me if I thought they should try to stop the labor. And I was very appreciative of, them giving me a chance to weigh in, but, I knew in my heart that our babies were coming that day. So we had a C-section. Again, I knew that was going to be all along. My kids were breech pretty much the whole time. And, I'm thinking back that day, there was a lot of people there. It's really overwhelming. I know that they called in a lot of NICU staff, but I didn't really register to me like what actually was going to happen. And I think that it finally sunk in, that moment when your babies go to the NICU and then you go to a room and by yourself. It's quite a feeling. I know they brought in some pictures, and my husband was pretty torn. Like, who do I spend my time with, her or the kids? And I think we've all felt that it's hard to be away from your babies. And I just remember one question as they carted them off, they said something about, do you want us to use some donor breast milk? Or, I'm thinking where are you taking them? What's going on? It's just so overwhelming in that moment.
I think that's pretty incredible for our audience to hear, because you're someone who lives in this world and you're around babies and deliveries constantly, but no matter what, it's still such a shock to have it be so radically different than your expectations.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we had a C-section date in mind, and this is how it was going to go. And it absolutely did not go that way. And, our NICU stay was pretty straightforward. I have to say, we didn't really have a lot of setbacks. Basically they were there to work on that skill, this, suck, swallow, breathe, and work on their eating. We were there for about 2.5 weeks. And then they were able to come home with us. So it's an amazing experience. It's a stressful experience. You see a lot of families coming in, and like comparatively, like I said, my journey in the NICU was not as bumpy as some individuals. And I think we can all share that same feeling that when you walk in and you do see a setback for the day. For us, it was the feeding tube, and then the time limits on feeding, all of those kind of things. Like, you just feel like your baby can do it, and then they're telling you, nope, they can't. We'll just tube feed the rest of it. And I do remember that feeling of frustration, for sure. But they're doing great now. They've hit all of their milestones, which is great. My daughter has been a little bit slower with hers, but by the time they were 2 years old, they were pretty much all caught up. So yeah, they're pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
I'm really, the NICU is a very special place to me. It's a place that I will always hold dear to my heart. I mean, it's not very many circumstances where we do have to leave our kids in the care of somebody else for that long of a time.
Right.
And, I'm grateful for all of the NICU staff, across the country that are able to love our babies when we're not able to be there. And it's not an easy journey, but this is our story. And so it comes with a lot of extra emotions. I remember at some point just asking my husband, I wonder what it's like for people that just get to bring their baby home.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of us feel that way. And it still creeps into my mind, even though we're further and further removed from that day that we came to discharge me without our kids. And I still wonder what that feeling is like, where everybody gets to walk out of the hospital together. And I've had to just accept that that's, we're done having children. I mean, these are going to be our kids, and this is my story. And but I think it's easy for all of us to wonder about the what ifs. What is it like to be, to have it look differently? But I'm grateful for the strength that it's given me as a mom. Yeah, I think that's about all.
That's so beautiful. And correct me if I'm wrong, but was your specialty always in high risk pregnancy?
So, I always have had an interest in it.
Okay.
I do the full scope of OBGYN, but high risk pregnancies certainly are something that I definitely take a affinity for.
Okay.
Mostly because, not just because I've been through that, but even before then, my philosophy has always been to try to reduce anxiety. I think that, we go into pregnancies with a lot of us with a lot of anxiety about how is it going to be, how am I going to feel? Is my child going to develop okay? Is everything, as it should be? And, having a high risk pregnancy doesn't necessarily mean that we have to add to that. There are things about a high risk pregnancy that are special. And, I try to help patients. At least this is what I had to do, because I didn't want to be considered high risk pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I considered myself a healthy person. I thought, twins, it doesn't necessarily have to be a high risk pregnancy. So I avoided, like, in my mind, those thoughts. And when it came time to do some extra monitoring and the weekly testing and all of that stuff, I tried to shape the way that I thought about it, and this is what I try to share with patients now, that this is just a way that we can make sure that your babies are still healthy. And this is a lot of other moms don't get that experience of that extra attention and surveillance, if you want to call it that. So I just try to change the narrative a little bit, and try to think about the positives, because I think towards once you reach that point around that 22, 23 weeks, I think all of us start, we're looking and we know that babies can survive outside of us at that point in time. So it's almost like this shift in thinking, like you want to make it as far as you can in the pregnancy, but you also hear these stories about people having a devastating loss while they're still pregnant. So, I mean, there's just so many conflicting emotions. And for those that don't have more surveillance, they're sometimes left wondering, is everything okay? And, that's one thing about a high-risk pregnancy, is you do get a lot of reassurance that everything is okay.
Right. The reason I asked that was because I was curious if that was your specialty prior to having your twins, or if that became more of your specialty after you had experienced it yourself.
Yeah, sure. No, it was always something that I was interested in.
That's so cool. And do you feel like it shaped, like your experience shaped how you now care for your patients, and just like your heart and how you care for your patients?
I absolutely. I mean, I don't know how it couldn't. Quite honestly, I see a lot of moms that had a NICU baby the first time around, and maybe the experience wasn't as positive as maybe other families have had. And so we talk a lot about, again, changing that narrative, that just because you had this experience and this is the way you feel about your previous pregnancy, that doesn't have to be the story this time, and we can change the narrative. And mostly just a lot of reassurance that you may not feel okay, but you will be okay. I think that's something that all of us can relate to, and that we can have a lot of emotions that can exist at the same time. Fear and love, excitement and fear, anxiety, and just learning to understand what you can control and what you can't.
Yeah, absolutely.
That really reminds me of, we've done an interview and just tend to worship Parijat Deshpande, the author of Pregnancy Brain, because she talks about, maintaining, a healthy mind-body situation during high-risk pregnancy. And like you say, it's about acknowledging where you're at and acknowledging those feelings and just providing as much safety for your mind and body as you can, because there's nothing else. It's just a time of like literally no control of your body, which is just, it's insane. And actually, I think maybe this is a great time to start with some of the questions that our audience have submitted for you.
Sure.
I think the first and foremost being, what does high-risk pregnancy mean? And, what are the factors used to diagnose the condition of high-risk pregnancy?
So generally, high-risk pregnancies can fall into different categories as to why they're considered more high risk. One can be a factor, something with mom that was pre-existing prior to pregnancy. So maybe she has a medical condition like diabetes or kidney disease that we know puts her more at risk for having complications during pregnancy. There may be something that we determine, midway through the pregnancy that changes the risk. So typically that's either something has developed with mom that's new, like blood pressure issues or low blood counts or platelets, or there's an issue with baby that we determine later on, or both. So mom develops a new condition and baby is impacted by it. So those are generally the issues that are going to put you into a higher risk category.
Sure. And if a mom was diagnosed as having more of a high risk pregnancy, how would her level of care change, or what would her pregnancy checkups look like that might be different for a quote normal healthy pregnancy?
Sure. So again, it depends a little bit on what the issue is, but most of the time, more frequent appointments, sometimes as often as once or twice a week. You may get a referral to a maternal fetal medicine specialist, which that's all they do, is they specialize in high-risk pregnancies. And we have, there's specialists all across the country, and they will typically weigh in with recommendations about how to make sure that we can keep the pregnancy as healthy as possible. But generally, it's more ultrasounds, meaning more surveillance of baby. So we might be watching how the baby grows. We might be checking the blood flow to the baby. We might be doing fitness tests, I call them, for the baby, those biophysical profiles that tell us that they're doing all of the things that they need to do while they're still inside. They may be monitoring the heart rate as well. And maybe, more of mom's vital signs too. So it might be coming in more often for blood pressure checks, or for, blood sugar checks.
Sure. And we can cut this out because maybe this is a dumb question, because I never have thought of it until right now.
No,
there's no dumb question.
But is the maternal fetal specialist more for the baby and then the high risk OB more for the mom, or do they both equally serve the baby and the mom? Is there a difference?
No, that's a great question. The difference, I would say they both serve in roles to help mom and baby.
Okay.
The difference is, so whereas I did 4 years of training and I did several months with a maternal fetal medicine specialist as part of our OBGYN training, OBGYNs can actually go on and do an additional 3 years of training just looking at high-risk pregnancies.
Okay.
And that's a maternal fetal medicine specialist. Typically, maternal fetal medicine specialists do not do deliveries.
Okay.
There are a few centers where they still might have their own patients that they would deliver, but most of the time they're a consultant. So they give recommendations about how to navigate a pregnancy. And for the most part, it's very standardized. So there's societies that outline, here's what we recommend for monitoring these kind of pregnancies. But sometimes, not everything fits into a perfect box, and it might be something that we've not seen before, and maybe they haven't seen before, and then it becomes a little bit more less defined, I guess.
Sure.
In how do we navigate this?
Sure.
I think that's what really astonished me when I started going through this world, because I had my son back in 2015.
Yeah.
And even between 2015 and 2019, the standards and the protocols had changed. I mean, it's just amazing how quickly the science and the research in this part of medicine has developed and continues to do so. And in a way that I think for moms should provide great hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've seen, I've been in practice for 16 years now, and I've seen the pendulum swing different ways with regard to how do we treat preterm labor, how do we treat preeclampsia. Sometimes, over time we call it different things. It gives me hope that there's still attention, given to trying to make pregnancies for those maybe that were higher risk before to change the outcome. Probably one of the most exciting changes for preterm delivery has been the weekly progesterone injections for some patients that it's appropriate. I've seen some pretty amazing results with that over the course of my career. With patients that maybe had a 32-week delivery or even a 28, and then go on to have a baby that's full term, and that's a big deal for a mom. So there's always breakthroughs. There's always new ways to look at things, and the hope is that we're getting better and better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, but let's say there's a hypothetical mama who's just been told she's a high-risk pregnancy, and maybe they've already had a baby that was, high risk. Maybe they had a preterm baby, or they're a genetic carrier for something. what can they do on their own in their lives to make their pregnancy healthier? You know, is there anything aside from eating healthy and exercise? What factors can the mama take control over in order to better herself and make herself safer?
Sure. I mean, all of the things that I think are inherent to, having a healthy pregnancy, eating right. One thing that I did in my pregnancy was acupuncture. I felt like that, even if it didn't help with anything else, it certainly reduced my anxiety. And it was, at least 30 minutes where I could just quiet my mind in a nice warm room. I think there's a lot of alternative medicine practices that can help us, and we can lean on those methodologies to help at least reduce our anxiety. I think that's probably the biggest thing, is trying to keep your mind-body connection well balanced, and keep that anxiety to reduce it as much as possible, getting healthy rest, and eating right, exercise if you're able to, but anything that's going to reduce that anxiety level, I think will be the most beneficial.
I love the idea too that it's, to use the technical word, prophylactic, because you're trying to prevent yourself from getting to that high level of, fight or flight, avoiding that place where your nervous system is on edge. Because it's just going to be, having been through 2 high-risk pregnancies, you're on edge constantly because it's in your body and you can't escape your body.
Right.
So it's just finding moments constantly to really get yourself through the day before it gets to a place of kind of disaster mode. And I think you do such a great job. It sounds like acknowledging in your practice that knowing that it's hard where you're at, but you'll get through it is so important.
Yeah. I think the other thing is just because, maybe a first pregnancy, went the way that it did, it doesn't always mean that the next one is going to go the same. And we do talk a lot, or at least with my patients and myself, about being cautious not to write the same story. Just that it can look different. It will look different just because you've already been through it once before. So I like to think about like the lens that we have of life. All of our viewpoints are very perfectly shaped by all of these unique experiences that we've had along the way. I think reaching out to other moms is huge. It's something that I wish I would have done more, particularly after my kids were born. I think we tend to think, well, I should just muscle through this. I shouldn't be feeling all of these things. I should, rather than just talking about it and acknowledging it, owning the feelings that are there, working through them. And one of the best ways to do that is leaning on other people who've been through the same thing.
Yeah. I know we're going to get to some of like the high risk pregnancy factors, but just to stay in the provider portion for 2 more seconds.
Sure.
Let's say that a mom was high risk in her previous pregnancy and she's hoping to have more of her own children. What is the benefit of staying with that same provider? Are there any benefits in switching a provider? And at what point are you getting too many opinions? And at what point is it like good for you to get those opinions? That fine line between like, I want to know all the possible outcomes from a lot of different providers, and yet that can sometimes only increase anxiety. So what is your opinion on that?
I think if, to me, the biggest thing between a patient and myself is just that level of trust. And that if there's questions about, is there another way to look at this? I think it, absolutely warrants, talking to other providers. I certainly don't get hurt or offended by that. I think it's a good thing. I know a lot of groups will have discussions about patients, but it's different. It's different when it's you, and you're trying to find that person that you connect with. I think that's very important. But there's a reason why the commercials for gum say 4 out of 5 dentists would recommend, right? Because not everybody is going to recommend necessarily exactly the same thing. So I think when you're sort of seeking out different perspectives, it's important to ask yourself as a patient, like, what are you actually looking for? And sometimes if I sense that somebody's uneasy, we might just have that conversation about, well, what is exactly that you're looking for with answers, and maybe you don't have to keep looking. Maybe we can get to that answer together.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense.
So a lot of our moms are obviously previous NICU moms, and they're really thinking about getting pregnant again. That's something we see all the time in our online group, and just the anxiety surrounding it. And just like you talked about it, their only experience has led to the NICU. So they have a really hard time visualizing it being any other way. And in a lot of times it means that they are going to be high risks. So, what should, a mama consider before contemplating getting pregnant again after a NICU stay, if it means they'll be considered high risk? Sure.
I mean, I think having a conversation about timing is important. If there are recommendations that can actually reduce your just general risks. So if there was a C-section before, generally we'd want you to wait probably about a year before trying again. I think it's really about focusing those things that you can control. So if it's that you have diabetes, maybe you have a goal about where you want to get your blood sugars before you get pregnant. If you have high blood pressure, maybe it's about getting on a medication that's safe during pregnancy prior to getting pregnant, and making sure that the blood pressure is good before. We can't control what happens, with our baby's development necessarily, outside of starting prenatal vitamins in the three months before. We definitely know that will reduce risks of having developmental issues for baby, meaning anatomy, etc. But generally, if you've had a preterm delivery prior, that does at least raise the provider's eyebrows about, there's a possibility that this could happen again. But not always. We're amazed all the time. I'm amazed all the time. I've had patients with really severe preeclampsia in their first pregnancy, for example, and then go on to have healthy, pregnancies in the future without preeclampsia. Not always. Sometimes if it happens again, it happens more severe, and it's even scarier. And I think going into it, having an honest conversation with your provider about, what can happen on this end of the spectrum and what can happen on this end of the spectrum, and hopefully it falls somewhere in the middle.
So maybe that's a good place to ask, what are some questions that a mom who's considering having more kids ask her provider? Are there any questions that she can ask that are helpful? And, because sometimes you get to the appointment and you just brain fart,
totally.
I want a baby, now what? So
yeah.
Are there any questions that are helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, just this kind of those basics. What's my health? What's my health status? And asking, your provider that very question. Is there anything that you see that I need to change? Is my weight healthy? Are my sleep habits healthy? Exercise, eating habits healthy? All of those things that fall in the bucket that we can control. I think it's important to ask about them. Medications, are there any medications that I should change? Sometimes, I'll get kind of a panic message from a patient that maybe was taking something for migraines, or, some other thing, maybe it's acne medication. Asking those questions ahead of time so that you can save yourself some anxiety on the other end when you do actually get pregnant. And then I think those questions about where you get really serious, if you have had a NICU baby in the past and a high-risk pregnancy, asking that question, is it possible for me to have a low-risk pregnancy, or normal, if you want to use that word? And the answer may be, you're always going to be considered high risk, and for this reason. So I don't think there's ever a bad question. I think the sad thing would be if you have questions and you didn't ask.
Right. One medication that we sometimes hear moms concerned about having to go off when trying to conceive or becoming pregnant is their anxiety medication.
Sure.
So as a provider, what type of guidelines or instruction do you give with anxiety medication while a mom is pregnant?
So, there's obviously different categories. There are some which I generally would want you to go off of. And most of the time, those are those as needed anxiety medications, like Xanax is probably a common one that sometimes people will take for an acute anxiety attack. It's tough with some of the more SSRIs are a very common antidepressant, anti-anxiety medication. And there are some that we know more about during pregnancy than others. So we have a conversation about should we try to make that switch? There are some times where patients have worked really hard to get their anxiety under control and have tried a lot of different medications. And so generally in those circumstances, I would try to keep you on the same medication. There is a medication that's a category B in pregnancy that is kind of an older one, and that's what I switched to when I was trying to get pregnant. It's called Buspar, which it's not used a lot.
Buspar, yeah.
And I did really well with it, and so a lot of times patients aren't aware that there are alternative options, so I will talk to them about switching to that one.
Sure.
I think the bottom line, when I'm hearing the bottom thread here is that one of the best ways you can advocate for yourself is just to ask questions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, it's, you're the experts. We're coming to you. And I think sometimes, just historically, women feel like you're the experts. I shouldn't do anything. But in truth, a lot of times we see that women's intuition and gut and the things that they're experiencing in the body are worthy of question.
For sure. It comes up a lot with my patients where I will, we might have this discussion, and then at the last thing I'll say is, but you know your body best. Mm-hmm. So I need you to weigh in and tell me what your thoughts are about XYZ. Because I agree. I mean, the times where I've tried to talk a patient out of something or into something, and maybe her gut was telling her something else. I don't, let me just say, I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
When it's reasonable. So I do think there is a lot to patients. We know ourselves best. We know what our comfort zone is. And, I think a lot of us are willing to go outside of it to a certain point. Mm-hmm.
I know I was this way, but I am married to statistics, and in having spent so much time in an MFM office and talking, I had like 8 preconception meetings with my OB, and she was like, "Hi, we're going to talk about this again." But I just really feel like a lot of NICU moms do a lot of research after the fact about what are the statistics around pre-pumping again? Sure. I have an incompetent cervix. Will it happen again? I had preterm contractions. Will it happen again? I had, oh my gosh, why can't I think of the word for high blood pressure in pregnancy? Ashley, you had it. What's wrong with
preeclampsia?
Preeclampsia.
Pause. I had preeclampsia. What's the rate of that happening again? So you look at all of these things and statistics, and sometimes you're in 2 categories or 1 or whatever. Yeah. So what are those statistics, for repeat preterm labors and preeclampsia? Do you relay those to your patients, and how useful are they for determining when something will happen again?
Sure. The statistics are out there. I think that, before Google, they were just harder to access, right? But I think all of us utilize, searches and try to get as much information as we can, because we do want to go into a discussion with our provider, at least armed with some background, right? Like we want to have some knowledge base going in. And, generally, if you had a preterm delivery previously, your risk is probably about 20% to have it again, depending on what your, risk factors are. Something like an incompetent cervix, is something that does not change. That one is something about your body that you wouldn't be able to change with anything between pregnancies. So generally, most of us would say, if it's diagnosed accurately, that in that next pregnancy, we can intervene sooner than because the hard part about incompetent cervix is oftentimes you don't know it until, it's your 20 some weeks and all of a sudden your cervix is dilated. And knowing it going into the next pregnancy, we actually can put in a cerclage, the appropriate type of cerclage for your particular situation, and hopefully gain more time out of the pregnancy. But preeclampsia is a tough one. I mean, the statistics are kind of all over the place about will it happen again. What my experience is, if it's going to happen again, generally it is more severe the second time. And oftentimes earlier, but I would say it's still probably a 20% chance that you will develop preeclampsia in a subsequent pregnancy. We know, or at least we think we know, that it has something, there's something about a first-time pregnancy with that partner that puts you a little more at risk for preeclampsia. And then I've seen patients that had preeclampsia and then maybe had another child with that same partner, and it was a pregnancy that wasn't impacted, and then maybe life changed and they have a new partner and then had preeclampsia in that next pregnancy. So I think there's still a lot to learn about what the causes are of some of these issues that happen during pregnancy. I know a baby aspirin a day can help with a lot of things, preeclampsia being one of them. So, I know I took that in my pregnancy just because I was 41, and with twins, I certainly knew that it could help reduce my risk of preeclampsia.
I think that's the hard thing about it, is that you come out of the NICU most of the time with PTSD, like 70% of people do. And oftentimes that's related to PPD or PPA, any of the PMADs. And so you are seeking control. You want answers, because that's like a hallmark of anxiety, is intolerance of uncertainty. But there is just inherently question marks around a lot of these things that lead to NICU stays. Like, we'll just never know, So I think that's really hard for moms to grieve. And like you said at the very top, you can't help but wonder, well, what would it have been like if this had gone differently, right? It's part of the grief we experience. So how do you even start mentally preparing? How do you prepare mamas and encourage them, through that anxiety and PTSD in this high-risk pregnancy?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, we talk a lot about just small goals. I think, during the pregnancy, I think sometimes what I see is people get really overwhelmed, like looking at the finish line, when really maybe we just need to look at the end of the block. Like what do we need to focus on for this week? And, this week, here's all the things that are going well. And, so I usually will set some smaller goals. If it was that you delivered at 26 weeks in your first pregnancy, then I will say, okay, well, let's shoot for full term, but hey, 28 weeks would be even better. And knowing that every day counts, every day is a win, that we can stay pregnant and stay healthy in doing so. So, I think for me, when I break down my anxiety into little smaller, more manageable chunks, it just is more manageable. Mm-hmm. And so I think doing that with your doctor certainly is helpful. And then I think going into it, sometimes we have a discussion about what things do you not want me to say. I mean, even there's some words I think that can sort of trigger your anxiety. And so we, even a discussion around, let's not talk about XYZ until it's actually something that I need to worry about.
Yeah.
I know that that's not everybody's practice style, but, generally I think it's more helpful for us to walk into an appointment and be like, oh gosh, everything looks great today. And not go through as you're walking out the door, this laundry list of all these things that you need to worry about as you're leaving.
Yes. I was actually just going to ask you is there a way to kind of control that narrative a little bit? Because I remember when my pregnancy became high risk, we then started meeting with maternal fetal medicine, and those ultrasounds naturally are just like really extensive. I mean, they were telling me the size of his kidneys and and I was like, oh, his kidneys are this size. Like, did I need to know that?
Right.
So it's really encouraging to hear you say that we do have a part in controlling that narrative a little bit so that we don't go home with that, I'm measuring his kidneys and his heart and now the shape of his head. It's just like one thing at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's absolutely appropriate to say, let's focus on the things that you really need me to know. And if it's that we're just going to talk about positive things today, and I get it that there's stuff to watch out for or stuff that you might be watching for, but I would prefer not to talk about that at every visit unless you absolutely think we have to, kind of thing. I think that's more than I've had patients where the most recent one, she has a small baby, and we've been watching it, and I mean, I will just say, yep, we're the same for growth, and she would say, yep, and I'm not worried about it, and we don't talk about it anymore. Like we move on to the next thing, which is okay, because I think she knows that I'm going to tell her if there's something that we need to intervene and do something about.
Right. Yeah. That's awesome.
Oh. Yeah, it reminds me of my second pregnancy. I remember when they first said, well, obviously we'd love to get you to full term, but 28 weeks is our goal. And I said, what? I don't want it to be 28 weeks. I want it to be 37 weeks. And they said, you don't, just trust us, let's just get to viability. Let's get to 28. Let's do those chunks. And I'm so glad they did, because then when I got to 28, it felt like such a win. It felt like totally different than my last pregnancy. We got a bunch of donuts with the 28 written on them from Sandy's Donuts. And my sister got me those, those cute balloons, like those rose gold balloons, 28. And we celebrated it, and it felt like a win. I love the idea that for high risk mamas that every day is a win, because it's an encouragement for you. Like, you got to the end, you're in bed again, and you did it. You did one more day. And that's the only way you're going to get through it.
Totally. Yeah. That's awesome. Everybody should celebrate with Sandy's Donuts.
Amen.
Yes. I believe they ship nationally. So
awesome.
So as we close down this fantastic conversation, are there any final words of encouragement you want to share with NICU mamas, past and present, or NICU high risk pregnancy mamas, especially as we kind of enter this season where there's a lot of quote unquote, for lack of a better word, holidays, surround life, NICU Awareness Month and pregnancy, a loss awareness, all these things that are coming up that are really charged for moms. What encouragement do you have for them?
I think, just to recognize the incredible strength that exists within all of us. I'm amazed at, how I thought getting through a high risk pregnancy and then through a NICU stay, like that's where it ends, right? But the next phase, being a parent, is the most wonderful and hardest job that I've ever taken on. And I'm grateful every day that I get to do it. And not everybody has a happy ending with regard to, being able to eventually bring your child home. And there's a lot of grief and PTSD that goes with having a premature child and a child in the NICU, but it doesn't end just there, right? Like we look at our children and there's always that constant fear that you don't want to miss anything as they're developing. And then for those moms who didn't get to take their child home, recognizing that grief and joy can exist together. I think that's probably been one of the biggest lessons in my life, that I don't have to stay in grief. But I can't remove it completely. I think when you deal with loss, particularly the loss of a child, it stays with you. And so I would never tell a mom I won't even say the words out loud, some of the things that people say to moms who have lost a baby or a child, that it's okay to feel joy again. It's okay to want to have another child. That it doesn't take away from what you feel from your child that you lost. That there's enough love to go around. And I think that we, like I said, we're just extraordinary women, and we can do amazing things. I'm just super amazed by you guys welcoming me into the group on Facebook, and the stories. I actually have to kind of hold myself back from commenting on everything, because I don't want to, I just like seeing what people have to put out there. And I just want to immerse myself in it. So what you're doing is amazing, and it's helping a lot of women. It's quite clear there's just a lot of amazing women out there with a story to tell. And I'm glad you have this platform for them to do it. It's pretty spectacular.
Thank you.
Yeah, we feel pretty lucky when we look into the support group online, because it's like we've created a band of warriors who support each other. Like within 5 minutes of something being posted, there's 24 comments. And I think it's really different than a lot of other spaces, because I'm sure you are very familiar with the Facebook NICU groups that exist. And some of them are more medical than others. And some of them are, there's a lot of questions, but we've really tried to develop an environment that's purely based on encouragement and empowerment. So I'm so glad you're a part of it. That's so important.
This episode was really beautiful. Thank you. And just thank you for approaching it with such grace and empathy. I think we have had a lot of moms, including myself, have appointments where it was like, yep, it'll happen again. And it was like, oh my gosh, what? So thank you for just approaching the conversation with just such tenderness, because this is, I haven't gone through everything in my life yet, but wanting kids is one of the most vulnerable positions I've ever felt. And so wanting something that you don't know if you can have, or, not being able to control that. So having you approach it with such love is it's going to be really valuable for the moms that tune in.
Well, good. Hopefully they can gain a little bit from our time together. So thanks.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, mamas, thank you so much for tuning in today. And thank you, Dr. Steph, again, for just approaching the conversation with such love and empathy. And to the moms listening that are pregnant again after having a high-risk pregnancy, we hope that this offered just some soothe to your heart as you navigate this new pregnancy journey that you're on. And to the mamas that are questioning, what is next for our family? How will we grow our family? We hope that this offered just some tangible wisdom and some advice, and maybe just some practical questions to ask your providers. So if anything, I think today was just a reminder that, mama, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to seek those answers out. And you know your body best. So mamas, thank you again for tuning in. We hope that you have a wonderful week, and we'll chat with you guys next time.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Dear NICU Mama podcast.
If you loved this episode, we'd be so grateful for a review on any of the podcast platforms.
And we'd love to continue connecting with you via our social media pages or a private Facebook group. And ultimately, NICU Mama, welcome to the sisterhood.